estate license exam for dummies. Part 5. You want how much? Evaluation and financing of real estate. In this part, find out the basics on appraising process so that you understand market factors that create value. As a real estate professional, you not only need to know the value of property, but you also need to know about the appraisal process to pass the real estate exam. Know why taxes are collected, how much tax rates are established, and how to calculate taxes on a specific piece of property. Get acquainted with the definitions of important tax terms and how much deductions and credits are figured. Examine the basics of mortgage process and the sources of mortgage funding, including several considerations that lenders take into account when making a loan. Discover different kinds of mortgages and repayment plans. Do a little mortgage math and find out about laws that require everyone to be treated fairly when they try to borrow mortgage money, even if they're 70 years old and want a 30-year mortgage. Apply some simple math concepts to practice real estate problems. No one likes the math questions on a real estate license exam. Well, fear not. You learn most of the math on this test when you were in the middle school. In this chapter, knowing what appraisals are and why you need them, recognizing the basic principles that affect real estate value, comprehending the different kinds of value, checking out factors that affect value, using 3 different methods to estimate a property's value. Chapter 14, Appraising Property. An important part of every real estate sale, or for that matter, almost every real estate transaction, involves the value of the property. For example, you may need to know the value of a house you inherited for real estate tax purposes. Real estate agents, brokers, and salesperson are expected to know something about why one piece of property is more valuable than another. Agents are also expected to know about the methods appraisers use to estimate property values. This chapter helps you pass the exam by giving you information about market factors that create value. It also discusses different types of value and describes the principal methodology that appraisers use with their work. Figuring out appraisal basics. A real estate agent is interested in property value for a number of reasons. An agent usually helps a seller set an asking price for a property when it's being offered for sale. An agent representing a buyer often advises his client on the value of the property that they are being considered for purchase. Finally, a knowledgeable agent probably provides important information to appraisers when she completes the mortgage appraisal. Knowing what an appraisal is. An appraisal is an estimate or opinion of the value usually undertaken by a trained individual licensed or certified to do the work based on the research in the real estate market. The term appraisal refers to the work itself as a written product of that work. The definition often appears on state licensing exams and may sometimes be stated simply as an option of value. Assessing or appraising. Many people commonly misuse the words assessing when they really mean appraising. Assessing and appraising are 2 different tasks. The real estate appraisal is the estimate of value. Real estate assessment is a certain type of value estimate done for the specific purpose of collecting property taxes. Because in the whole chapter on property taxes explain assessments in detail, chapter 16, if you're really curious. I don't go any further than I do here. Just remember, an appraisal isn't an assessment, and the appraiser appraising property and doesn't assess it. The word estimate and option and opinion are important in their definitions. Notice, for an example, that don't define an appraisal or a calculation of value. Although appraisers use a variety of mathematical techniques in their work, the act of arriving at a value of a property or a particular piece of property can never be that precise. So appraisers never say that they calculate value. An appraiser is a researcher, a private detective, to come up with an estimate. The appraiser investigating the following: economic factors, employment and interest rates, environmental factors, the presence of pollutants in the area or the land, physical factors, the real estate location, size, and condition, social factors, demand for a particular type of housing, such as demand by an aging population for a certain type of house. The property being appraised is called a subject property. Although the definition of the term subject property isn't critical for exam purposes, you need to understand the reference whenever you're asked a question that refers to a property being appraised. Another important item to remember is that when a client hires an appraiser to provide an objective opinion of the value of the subject property, most appraisers work independently on a fee-for-service basis. Therefore, they have no interest in the property value. Furthermore, the code of ethics and standards that licensed and certified appraisers must follow require them to reveal any interest in the property they're appraising to the client. Say you find a property and you want to buy it, and you want to find out whether the asking price is fair. You look in the yellow pages and hire a Mary appraiser. But it turns out Mary's mother owns the property. Mary must tell you about her interest in the property or be a violation of the code of ethics and standards. Seeking an appraisal. Why you need one. Hiring an appraiser for real estate transactions often is a big decision, and many reasons merit such a step. Anytime value is an issue, you may want to have an appraisal done. The following list includes reasons why people most often have appraisals done. I cover the details of some of the following subjects in other chapters. For exam purposes, however, that you need to remember from the following information is a general list of why appraisals may be done. Buying. Buyers of real estate can hire an appraisal to determine the fairness of the asking price of a property. Eminent domain. The government seizure property owned real estate for public use through eminent domain. It must pay for the property. The government determines the amount of payments on which helps of an appraisal. See Chapter 8. Estate validation. When someone dies, federal and state taxes may have to be paid on the value of the estate. If the estate includes real estate, the property has to be appraised to establish the real estate value of the date of death. Exchange of ownership. When owners exchange real estate, rather than selling it for money, the appraisers establish the value of the property to determine the fairness of the exchange. Find information on property exchanges in Chapter 17. Mortgage appraisal. Mortgage lenders, that is, banks, savings and loans associations, and other lenders, order the vast majority of appraisals. When buying or refinancing property, the borrower must put the property up as collateral. If the property owner defaults on a loan, the lender takes the property and sells it. The lender wants to be sure that if the owner defaults, the property value covers the loan. For more information on mortgages, see Chapter 15. Property taxes. Real estate taxes are based on assessed values, which in turn are based on market values. Appraisals are sometimes done for clients who want to argue with municipal, city, town, and villages tax assessors to lower assessed value to obtain a reduction in taxes. I talk about taxes in Chapter 16. Selling. People who want to sell their real estate can seek an appraisal to determine a fair and competitive asking price for their property. Most often, a seller asks a real estate agent for his opinion of the value when preparing to sell a house. Taxes and other property taxes. Taxes often are due when someone gives a piece of real estate to someone as a gift. Alternatively, there may be tax benefits in the form of deductions if someone gives real estate to a charitable organization. In both cases, the appraiser comes in to determine the property value. Various court proceedings. Bankruptcies, divorce, and dissolving of a partnership or corporation may also involve real estate holdings. Appraisals usually establish the value of the property in question. Becoming an appraiser. Although the book focuses on becoming a real estate broker or salesperson, people often are interested in what it takes to become an appraiser. Real estate appraising also is a licensed occupation governed by individual state laws. So if you're interested in this field, I encourage you to contact your state licensing authority to obtain the specific requirements in your home state. Some states have separate volunteer boards or commissions or brokers/salespersons and appraisers. Usually, however, the same state department or agency that handles real estate brokerage and salesperson license also governs appraisal licensing. Prior to 1990, no widespread licensing of appraisers existed, but the savings and loan crisis of the late 1980s changed that after authorities discovered that lack of honest and competent appraisers was part of the reasons why the bank loans so much money on properties that were overvalued. General information about appraisal licensing can be gotten from the Appraising Foundation in Washington, D.C. www.appraisalfoundation.org. But you should check with your state to see what the local requirements are if you're interested. Understanding the importance of location. Many things ultimately affect the value of a real estate. You probably heard of the classic real estate question. What are the three most important factors that determine a real estate value? Answer: location, location, location. Although not only factor, location probably is the most important. I discuss this and other factors later in this chapter. But what does location really mean? And why is it so important? And what about all the other factors affecting real estate values? This section discusses what and why the location issues is so important for real estate values. You can't move it. The most important characteristic of real estate and the reason location is such an important factor is its validation, is the fact that the real estate is immovable. Exam questions about the area usually focus on the issues of immobility, being the reason location is such an important value characteristic. Unlike personal property, you can't move real estate. Think about this statement. It's what makes real estate so unique and a location issue so important. So why own a place of real estate in a low crime neighborhood? And over time, the neighborhood begins to change and becomes somewhat unsafe. You just move the real estate, right? You can sell the real estate and move, but you can't move the real estate itself. What's more, because you can't move the real estate and the environment around it has changed, the value of the real estate probably has changed too. Not so with brand new cars. If you think it's unsafe to park on the street, just park on a different block or in a parking garage. You're not on Gilligan's Island. The fact that real estate can be moved makes it particularly vulnerable to the effects of the surrounding areas, which can be positive, such as a piece of residential real estate located in what is perceived to be a good school district. The influence on values can be negative if, for example, the real estate is located near a sewage treatment plant. My point is, you're not on an island, unless, of course, you are, in which case you have a 360-degree waterfront view. So who's better off than you? Real estate is immovable and highly affected by its surroundings. Therefore, I provide the following list of some, but not all, of the environmental factors outside of the real estate itself that may affect values. And this is what generally is meant by real estate location. Access to employment. Are there employment centers and therefore jobs available within a reasonable distance? Amenities and services. Can you find shopping centers, libraries, restaurants, and so on? Hazards and nuisances. Is real estate too close to a gas station, waste processing plant, or other unsightly or hazardous land uses? Nearness and transportation. Are you near highways or public transportation? Neighborhood compatibility. The surrounding land used for similar to your real estate. Safety. Make sure the crime levels are low as possible. Schools. You may want to check with neighborhoods about the perceived quality of the schools. See Chapter 5 for information about possible fair housing issues. We're discussing the quality of schools with the client or customer. Traffic. Are the surrounding roadways residential or commercial streets? Going into details on each of these points isn't important, but if you want to pass the exam, remember that many of these factors are relative to the particular piece of property in question. For example, most people don't want their homes located on a heavily traveled street, but if you own a business property, then this is exactly what you want to be located. You can't make any more of it. The amount of land available is limited. That may seem obvious, but think about it in the context of a car, a chair, or anything else that can be manufactured. You can make more of those products, but you can't make any more land. Only a limited amount of land is available anywhere. That, of course, doesn't make all land valuable, but it does say something about the value of property wherever people want to be. If you look at a list of the previous section, I think you'll agree that most people want to live in a safe neighborhood with good schools and easy access to jobs and shopping. However, only so many of those properties are available at any point in time. Given that many people want to live in those neighborhoods, competition ensures for those pieces of real estate, and the competition raises prices. Arriving at different types of value. Value is value, so you say, how could there be a different type of value? In most cases, you're correct. The type of value that appraisers usually deal with is called market value. While other kind of values may be unique to particular situations or particular person. In addition to discussing market value in a fair amount of detail, this section briefly covers a few of the other types of values that you may or appraisers may encounter. Market value, the type of value most often covered in real estate exams. Being able to at least distinguish among other types of values I cover is important on the test purposes. Going to market value, market value is the value that appraisers deal with most often. It is the value where most often concerns with the typical real estate transaction. Typical is the key word here. A typical buyer and a typical seller will establish market value with the price the seller is willing to sell and for the buyer is willing to pay. Keep in mind, both seller and buyers typically know as much about property as they can, have access and needed expertise like attorney or home inspectors, act in property as well, act in response to typical motives like wanting a house to live, and to have sufficient time to look at a number of properties that have been on the open market. Anything that changes these typical motivations may change the sales price of the real estate, but not its value. For example, in an old family homestead where a grandfather grew up is one in the market, and just have to have it for sentimental reasons. The market value is $150,000, but because you're so anxious to get it, you offer to pay $200,000 for it. The market value is still $150,000, even though the price paid was $200,000. Why? Because motivation was personal, not typical. Typical buyers would have paid no more than $150,000 because they see it only as a normal place to live. A sales meeting, the market value criteria also presumes what is known as an arm's length transaction. The arm's length transaction implies that no relationship exists between the parties and that the buyer and the seller each act in his or her own best interest. So buying your brother's house wouldn't be considered an arm's length transaction. Most exams ask for the definition in relationship to market value. Value and use. Value and use is the value of a property has the specific person who may use it for a specific purpose that generally unavailable to the typical buyer. Suppose a doctor obtains special permission from the city to use 2 rooms in his house as a medical office. The typical buyer looks at such a house and puts a value on those rooms for family or personal use, such as a family room or a den. However, another doctor looking at the property may be willing to pay a higher price because of his ability to use these rooms as a medical office. The typical buyer pays market value, while the doctor pays a higher price based on the value in use. Investment value. Investment value is the value to be specific investors with a specific plan for the property. Unlike value in use, which generally presupposes a use already in place, investment values assume a use to be that may be proposed. Investors A may be willing to pay $3 million for a warehouse to be used as a warehouse. Investor B wants to convert the warehouse to a multi-screen movie theater. Investor B may want to pay only $2 million for the warehouse because of additional expenses for the movie theater conversion project. Investor B probably will look for another piece of property that meets his investment criteria. Assessed value. Assessed value is the value placed on property for tax purposes. It is associated with the term ad valorem, which means according to the value. I cover assessed value in chapter 16. Creating, changing, and affecting values, some economic factors. Values doesn't just happen. People have to create it. Most of these personal actions, usually called economic influences, are nothing more than normal human behavior. In fact, as I go through these influences that affect real estate values, I expect you to say, "Oh, sure, I knew that," or "Of course, people want that." What you may not have known, and unfortunately, what the test writers want you to know, are the typical technical names for those normal behaviors. The definition in the following sections are usually covered on exams, so to be sure to remember them. The test asks for 2 kinds of questions about economic principles. And factors. You see questions about the definitions and questions asking you to identify the principles involved based on an example. Anticipation. All property values are created by the anticipation of future benefits the property will provide. You buy your house today and set the price today so that you can enjoy a bigger house for years to come. Balance. You find a balance between land value and building value in given areas. Overall, property values and builders' profit on new homes are maximized when the balance is maintained. For example, in most cases, you never want to build a house that costs $100,000 on a piece of vacant land that costs $500,000, unless, of course, there was gold on the property. Then who cares how much the house costs? No universal magic number exists for a proper balance between land and building value, but generally the balance needs to be similar to which exists in the surrounding neighborhoods. Change. Change is closely related to anticipation. The idea of change is that nothing remains the same. Physical, governmental, economic, and social changes all affect property value. Physical factors can include environmental changes such as weather, pollution, earthquakes. Governmental factors may include exchange in development regulations like zoning or the construction of new roads. Economic issues may be a change in interest rate or employment levels in the area. Social factors are issues like the aging of a baby boomers. Any and all of those and others can have an impact on the value of property. Completion. Competition. Competition describes the fact that real estate, the supply side, developers and builders try to meet the demand side, buyers and renters until the demand is satisfied. A developer may see a need for a new office building in a particular location. If the building is a success, other builders are likely to follow with more office buildings until the last office building a builder erects remains particularly vacant because suppliers have created a surplus of office spaces. Conformability. The value is created and sustained when the real estate characteristics are similar. If you live in a neighborhood of single-family houses, you don't want an office building to be built across the street from your house. The price of your house probably will be negatively affected by the incomparable land use. Contribution. In real estate terms, a building or a faucet is worth the value of the marketplace puts on it, not its cost. You can spend $1 million building a house, but it is in the wrong location or has extremely unusual design. It may not be worth $1 million. On the other hand, a $1,000 paint job may increase the ultimate selling price of a house by $5,000. Externalities. Real estate, because it stays in a fixed location, is affected by everything that happens around it. The gas station on the corner, the quality of the schools, the factory that closes down in town, mortgage interest rates, and so on, all have an important impact on the property value. Highest and best use. The principle of the highest and best use states that every property has a single use that is a result of the highest value for the property. The use must meet 4 criteria. It must be physically possible. You can't build an airport on a 2-acre piece of property. In fact, you can't build a regional shopping center either. But you can build a house or an apartment building, legally permitted. You may physically be able to build any of the structures I listed previously, but if the zoning or deed restriction says that all you can build on it is a store or office building, then your list of possibilities have been narrowed considerably. Economically feasible. Depending on the market conditions at the time, you may find that one or the other of the physical possible and legally permitted uses isn't economically feasible, which means you won't make any money on that use. Most maximally productive. If you get to the point where analysis that you still have at least 2 uses to meet the first 3 criteria, when you need to determine which use will result in the most value, that becomes your highest and best use. If you get to the economic feasibility criteria and the only uses merge from the analysis, then that's your highest and best use. Increasing and decreasing returns. Increasing and decreasing, sometimes diminishing returns related to adding improvements to a piece of real estate. Increasing returns comes in when an improvement adds more value to the real estate than it costs. A dollar spent gives you more than a dollar back. Decreasing returns occurs when an improvement gives back less value than it costs. The principle of increasing and decreasing returns is based on the principal contribution, which I discussed earlier in contribution section. An example of a principle might be adding bathrooms in a new house or adding them to an old house. The number here are the illustrated proposals only. Each bathroom may cost you $6,000, but the first one may net you back $10,000 in terms of value. The second may net $8,000 and the third only breaks even at $6,000. The fourth one $3,000 and the fifth one nothing. The returns on each bathroom go from increasing the value to creating no additional value. It's obviously that the buyers are putting less and less value on what essentially is unneeded bathrooms. Opportunity costs. For every investment opportunity you choose, you lose another investment opportunity. So when auntie dies and leaves you $100,000, you can invest it in real estate. In doing so, you miss the opportunity to invest the money in certified certificates of deposits at the bank. And if you get a 4% return on your money at the bank, and you give up the return by investing in real estate, you can make it at least 4% and then some in real estate investing. Plottage. The plottage principle states that the whole is sometimes greater than the sum of its parts, particularly when respect to real estate. You can put together 4 individual 5-acre parcels of land, each worth $50,000, to create a single 20-acre piece of property. This large piece may now enable you to do something with it that was impossible with the smaller pieces, such as building a regional-sized shopping mall. In return to the value of the whole property, or the plottage value, it is now $300,000 greater than 4 times 50 or $200,000. The act of putting the individual properties together is called assemblage. Recession and progression. You've heard the advice that you always buy the smaller house in the neighborhood and not the biggest one. If you ever wonder why, it's because the principal progression says that the higher value of larger homes tend to have a positive effect on the lesser values of the smaller home. Conservatively, low-priced homes have a negative effect on the value of the higher-priced homes. Substitution. The economic principle says that a buyer will try to pay as little as possible for the property that meets the buyer's needs. Given these houses, each of which satisfy the needs of a buyer, that the buyer will buy the least expensive house. Supply and demand. Because only so much land can be found on a particular location, and therefore only so much of anything, houses, stores, buildings, can be built. The balance between supply and demand affects value. If demand goes up, the supply goes down or remains the same, values increase. If the demand goes down and the supply increases, it stays the same, the value decreases. Sometimes on exam, the test mentioned only one of these factors. For example, of what happens to a price of value when the housing demand goes up. The implication is that the other factor, in the case supply, stays the same, so don't get confused. Surplus productivity. After the builder puts together the land, labor, materials, and coordinates necessarily to build a building and then sells it, the difference between the cost and the selling price is the surplus productivity. Economics use the term slightly profitable. Finding value by analyzing comparable sales. The principal approach that appraisers use to estimate property value involves analyzing the sales of other similar properties called comparables. This approach has several names, the most common in which the sale comparison approach. Some people may refer to it as market analysis approach and other market comparison approach. The strength of the sale comparison approach lies in the reliance on the principle of substitution. The principle states that no one pays more than necessarily for a piece of real estate that meets that person's needs. See the section similar in this chapter. The principle of substitution is what most people apply as when they search for a house to buy, even if they don't call it that, because this approach is based on previous sales of similar properties. It can provide an accurate estimate of real estate value. Appraisers use this approach most often when appraising single-family and 2 or 4 unit residential real estates. The weakness of this approach is when the market is slow and it becomes difficult to find comparable sales. Understanding the basics. The idea behind sales comparison approach is to compare previous sales to the real estate to the subject property being appraised to arrive at an estimate of the real estate value. You ask Joanne, the appraiser to appraise a 3-bedroom house, 2 baths, 2,500 square feet house in a typical suburb subdivision. Through her research into the sales of the area, Joanne finds 3 sales of almost identical houses in at least 4 months. These previous sold houses are called comparatables or comps. Each of the houses sold for $250,000. Joanne, by the way, is a very lucky appraiser because even similar houses don't often sell for the same price. Joanne estimates the value of the house that she's appraising to be $250,000 based on the fact that 3 similar houses recently sold for that price. And that is the sales comparison approach at its simplest. An appraiser normally investigates as many as 10 or more comparables, finally selecting a minimum of these 3 to 5 to use the sales comparison approach. After making all of the appropriate adjustments to each of the comparables, see the next section. An appraiser examines the comparables and arrives at the value estimate for the property. It seldom occurs when 3 adjustable sale prices are exactly the same. In this case, the problem is easy because the prices are all the same, and the prices are different. The appraisers never average 3 prices, but rather analyze the comparables and variable adjustments made. And though experience and training, judgment arrives at the same value estimate. Adjusting the sales price. The situation that appraisers most often have to deal with is applying the sales comparison approach, or comparables that have identical to the subject property. Appraisers go through an adjustment process to compensate for the difference in the properties. The adjustment process is really quite simple and pretty intuitive. And many people write the state's test and expect you to understand it and to be able to apply it. The subject property is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. Joanne, the appraiser, doesn't currently know the value of the house. A similar house sold 2 months ago for $325,000. The comparable house is called comparable A. And same in all respects as the subject property, except it has 4 bedrooms. Comparable A is superior to the objective property. Joanne's research indicates that that the value of the 4th bedroom is $25,000. That means that the buyer is compensated. Comparable A paid $25,000 more for the house than he or she would have for a 3-bedroom house. Joanne prepares her appraisal report, goes through the process of subtracting the $25,000 bedroom value from the $325,000 sale price of comparable A. The result price is $300,000. Is the adjusted sales price. You got $325,000 sales price for comparable A minus $25,000. The value of the 4th bedroom equals $300,000 adjusted sales price. Using the principle of substitution, the adjusted sales price for comparable A, or $300,000, is the estimated value of the 3-bedroom house. Now look at an opposite kind of adjustment. Joanne is still appraising the 3-bedroom house, 2-bedroom house. She finds another comparable, which she calls comparable B. Comparable also is the same as the subject property, except that it only has 1 bedroom. It is inferior to the subject sold for $290,000. Here, researchers indicate that the value of the 2nd bedroom is $10,000. What does she have to do to make it comparable like subject? She has to add the bedroom, or add specifically the value of the 2nd bedroom. So you take the $290,000 sales price of comparable B plus the $10,000 value for the 2nd bedroom, and it comes to $300,000 adjusted sales price. The adjusted sales price for comparable B, or the $300,000, is the estimated value for the 2-bedroom house. The adjustment process is a matter of adding or subtracting the value of the difference between the subject property and the comparable property to the form the comparable. Take a look at that again, because this part tends to be confusing people. you make the adjustments to the comparable to make the comparable property like the subject property. So keeping hands off the subject. The adjustment comparable indicates the appraiser the estimate value of the subject property. It isn't old enough. It matures, making age adjustments. When I talk about age, I'm not talking about the age of the appraiser. I mean the age of the structure. The market, that is the buyer and seller, takes the age of the structure into account when deciding on what to pay. Here's a little brain teaser. The subject property is 5 years old and comparable is 15 years old and sold for $190. Otherwise, the houses are similar. The value of the 10-year difference in age is $5,000. Should you add or subtract the $5,000 from the sale price of the comparable? That's right, you need to add the $5,000 because the 15-year-old house is considered worse than or inferior to the 5-year-old house. For now, I made up the $5,000 figure, but in other parts of the chapter, in the Finding Adjustment Value section, I discuss how you can find the value of an age or any other type of adjustment. For some reason, when age numbers are introduced into a problem of making adjustments, the directions plus or minus of the adjustments become a little more muddled. But if you apply the superior-inferior test, it becomes clear immediately. Older is considered worse. Therefore, add the adjustment value to a comparable cell. Newer is considered better. Therefore, subtract the adjustment value from the comparable cell. Having time to adjust for time. The sales comparison approach is based on previous sales in similar houses, comparables, to indicate the current value of the property being appraised. The word previous can cause some difficulty because real estate values tend to change over time. As recent history has shown, real estate values can go up or down. Take a look at an example of what usually is called the time of market adjustment. Once again, Joanne, the appraiser, is appraising a house. She finds a comparable house that is almost identical to the respect to the subject property. The comparable house sold for $300,000 5 months ago. Her research indicates that the real estate market has been quite strong in the area and the property values have gone up approximately 1% per month during the past 5 months. The property account for the rise of property value, Joanne needs to ask the question, what would the comparable have sold for instead of selling 5 months ago? It sold today. It will sell for 5% more. The adjuster calculation becomes 1% per month times 5 months equals 5%. 300,000 the sales price of the comparable times 5% increase in the value for the 5 months equals 15,000. The value of time adjustment. So 300,000 plus 15,000 equals 315,000 adjusted sales price. The adjusted sales price for the comparable 315,000 is the indicated value for the subject property. You calculated a downward trend in property values over time the same way. Only the value of the time adjustment is subtracted from the sales price of the comparable to give you the value of the subject property. And for your mathematical wizards who are wondering whether compounding the 1% per month, the common practice is so simple, added the monthly increase in real estate values to get a total percentage increase for the period of time you're dealing with. Figuring adjustment values. By now you're probably wondering where all these adjustment values come from. In fact, my appraisal students think that some kind of standardized set of numbers as to how much a bathroom or bedroom is worth. Although no such set of numbers exist, a method for getting these numbers does. The main way appraising finds the value of adjusting is extensive analysis of the market and using a technique called paired sales analysis to find these adjustment values. Paired sales analysis is based on the idea that if two houses are similar in all aspects except one, and the sales price of each home is different, the dollar amount of the difference between the two houses is likely the value of the unique attribute or feature of the one house. Look at the two houses, for example. House A has 4 bedrooms, is sold for $400,000. House B was sold for $360. Has 3 bedrooms. In all other aspects, House B is the same as House A. The only physical difference between the two houses is the 4th bedroom. As long as the monetary difference of $40,000 between the two sales price, the 4th bedroom in this case is worth $40,000. The appraiser can now take the $40,000 figure and use it, however appropriate, to make adjustments to comparables when applying the sales comparison approach to estimated values. Finding value by analyzing replacement costs and depreciation. Another method for estimating the value of real estate is called cost approach. The cost approach is based on the idea that components of a piece of real estate or the land and buildings can be added together to arrive to an estimated value. If they are valued separately, the cost approach is particularly useful for unique properties that have a few comparable sales and for new construction. If you were asked to appraise a church, for example, you may use the cost approach because it will be rare to find many sales of churches. A journey begins with the first step, or formula. The formula for a cost approach is as follows: replacement or reproduction cost minus depreciation plus land value equals the value. A breakdown of the steps of this method follows. Step 1. Estimate the replacement or reproduction cost of the improved structure. Turn to section Estimating Replacement and Production Costs for Instructions. Part 2. Estimate all the depreciation of the improvements. Occurred depreciation. See the section Estimating Depreciation for more information. Step 3. Subtract the occurred depreciation from the reproduction/replacement cost. Occurred depreciation is the total of all the estimated depreciation. Step 4. Estimate the land value separately. Flip to the section Dirt Costs Money Too. Estimating land value to discover the way. Step 5. The depreciation cost of the structure to the land. The result of the estimated value. The reproduction/replacement cost equals $300,000. Minus the incurred total depreciation, $60,000. So the depreciated value of improvements, $240,000. Plus the land value, $75,000. Estimated value, $315,000. I devote the rest of this section to discuss the discussion of each of these concepts. The first approach has a lot of terminology. It may be unfamiliar. Remember, most salesperson tests asks a lot of definition questions. Estimating replacement costs and reproduction costs. Reproduction cost is the cost to construct an exact duplicate of the subject property structure at today's cost. Replacement cost is the cost to construct a structure with the same usefulness, utilities as comparable structures using today's materials and standards. For example, you may use the cost approach to appraise a house with plaster walls. Reproduction cost estimates require estimating the cost to construct plaster walls. The replacement cost estimates, however, estimates the cost of putting up sheetrock walls according to the current standards. Replacement cost is most often used in the cost approach. Reproduction costs would be used for, say, historically or architecturally significant structures. Two types of costs are included in every construction cost estimate: direct cost and indirect cost. Direct cost, also called hard cost, are the expenses directly associated with the actual construction of the building, including labor and building materials. Indirect or soft costs are expenses not directly related to the physical construction process, including permits, fees, agricultural costs, builder's profit. Direct and indirect costs are part of the estimate of the cost. You should keep the four methods of estimating reproduction or replacement costs. For exam purposes, your ability to distinguish among the four methods by the characteristics is sufficient. Generally, no calculations are required. The four methods include square footage method. Involves calculating the cost of construction by multiplying the square footage of the structure by the construction cost for that particular type of building. For example, you multiply $100 per square foot cost to a building, the kind of house you're appraising, by 2,000 square feet total area of the house to arrive at the cost of $200,000 to replace the structure. The square footage method is the one more commonly used by appraisers to estimate the replacement or reproduction costs. Unit in place method provides the cost to construct a building by estimating the installation costs, including materials, of the individual components of the structure. So if you know you need 1,000 square feet of sheetrock to cover the walls, you need to find the cost of buying, installing, and finishing the sheetrock on a per square foot basis, and then multiply it by 1,000 square feet. Another approach to the method is to estimate the four main steps units to building a house. For instance, cost of foundation, cost of roof and framing, cost of mechanical, and the cost of walls to finish the work. Each step is estimated separately and then are all added together. Quantitatively survey method. Quantity survey method. More detailed than the previous method. It requires you to break down all the components of a building and estimate the cost and materials for installation separately. So in the sheetrock example, you estimate so many dollars each to buy the sheetrock, screws, tape to pay for the installation. Index method requires you to know the original construction costs without land of the subject building. Construction cost index number at the time and the current index number. You then multiply the original cost by the number that takes into account to increase the construction cost since the building was built. National companies that do this kind of research publish these numbers. If a building costs $100,000 to build originally, the construction cost index as the time of construction was 125, and the current index in the area of the type of structure is 175. The calculation is 175 divided by 125, which equals 1.4. 100,000 original construction costs times 1.4 equals 140,000 to construct the same building. Estimating depreciation. Now you arrive at the second step in applying the cost approach for estimating the value of a piece of property. Depreciation is the loss of value to any structure due to a variety of factors, such as wear and tear, age, poor location, each of which I discussed in this section. I generally view depreciation as a difference in value between the perfect new structure cost that you estimate and the actual value of the structure that's being appraised. The term accrued depreciation means the total depreciation of a building from all causes. You should also note that accrued depreciation is the kind of depreciation that concerns accountants when they depreciate a building or a piece of equipment for tax purposes. Licensing exams generally ask two types of questions about depreciation. A question asking the definition of a particular type of depreciation, and a question giving you an item of depreciation and asking you what type of depreciation the item represents. Occasionally, you may get a question that asks you to calculate depreciation using a very simple technique known as the straight line method. I reviewed that technique in this section. Don't be a square. The straight line method of calculating depreciation later in this chapter. Over the hill, physical deterioration, curable and incurable. Physical deterioration is the normal wear and tear that a building experiences as it ages, and it depends on the original quality of construction and the level of ongoing maintenance. The two categories of determination, occurred and incurred, have more to do with economics than actual physical possibilities in correcting something. As part of applying the cost approach, the appraiser analyzes these items. Curable deterioration refers to the form of deterioration that is economically feasible to repair. In other words, the increase in value exceeds the cost of repair. Painting is a good example of something that generally adds value than it costs. Incurable is the cost of repairing an item surpasses the value of adding to the structure. The item is considered incurable even if it can't be fixed. Usually these forms of deterioration are physical items associated with the structure of the building. Significant foundation repairs probably would be classified as incurable. They're incurable because you wouldn't benefit economically by fixing them. Functional obsolescence. Functional obsolescence. Outmoded designs in older structures or unacceptable designs in newer structures usually point to a type of depreciation known as functional obsolescence. This too is separate into curable and incurable categories related to economic feasibility. The older homes that has 4 bedrooms but a single bedroom located off the kitchen suffers from functional obsolescence. The example shows incurability because the cost of constructing an entirely new bathroom probably exceeds any increase in value to the house it may generate. A newer house built only 2 bedrooms and a room for a home office would suffer from curable function obsolescence. Most people would want at least 3 bedrooms. Adding a closet to the bedroom office space, converting it into a bedroom, would be relatively easy, so the value of the house increased by an amount greater than what you spent to build a closet. External obsolescence. External obsolescence is a form of depreciation caused by factors external to the land itself. It's always incurable because land can't be moved. Economically, no amount of money can correct the problem. This form of depreciation can be caused by economic or physical, usually in location features. A gas station adjacent to a single-family house is a source of external obsolescence. Unusually bad market conditions can also be considered external obsolescence. Don't be square. The straight line method for calculating depreciation. The straight line method of calculating depreciation is one of the few math questions you might be asked about the cost approach. The straight line method for estimating depreciation presumes that a structure deterioration is the same rate each year. This method, which also is called the economic age life method, involves an estimate of what is called the total economic life of a building and its effective age. The number of somewhat subjective estimates that appraisers make when using the straight line method. Don't worry where the appraiser gets these numbers. In exam purposes, remember the definition of how to do the calculation. The economic life of a building reflects the number of years it contributes to the value of the land. The effective age is an exact estimate of how old the building appears to be, given wear and tear, maintenance, and upgrades. For example, say you have 2 buildings built 40 years ago, and one has been completely upgraded and well maintained, but the other has had little done to it. These 2 buildings will have different effective ages. The calculation presumes that the building deteriorates at the equal rates during the economic life. Therefore, if you estimate the economic life of a building to be 50 years, in 1 year it deteriorates 2% of its total value. In effect, it uses up 2% of its total economic life. The The fraction is 1 over 50, also is 2%. So the building depreciates at the rate of 2% per year because the physical deterioration. Just in case you get thrown in question with a different total economic life, say 40 years, the calculation would be 1 over 40. If you divide 1 by 40, you get 2.5%. Whatever the total economic life, if you divide the number of 1 is the total economic life, you get the annual percentage that the building depreciates. The next step is where you estimate the effective age comes in. Say the effective age of building is 10 years. That means it has been used up 10 years of its economic life. If the building economic life is 50 years, and from the previous calculation, you know that the depreciation at 2% per year, all you do is multiply the effective age by the annual percentage and the depreciation to get the total depreciation. In this example, 10 years effective age times 2% per year equals 20% total depreciation. The final price of the formula is multiplying the total percentage of depreciation by the reproduction or the replacement cost. To continue the example, say the reproduction cost is $100,000, and the formula follows: $100,000 reproduction cost times 20% or times 0.2 equals $20,000 total depreciation. 100,000 reproduction costs minus 20,000 depreciation equals 80,000 depreciated cost of improvements. For the test, you will need to be able to do all these calculations when given appropriate data. Dirt costs money too, estimating land value. The final step in the cost approach for the appraiser is to develop an estimate of the land value and add it to the depreciated value of the reproduction or replacement costs. Appraisers use a variety of methods to calculate land value. The methods may vary in different types of lands being appraised and the information available. The most common method for estimating the value of a single piece of property on which you'll build a house is the sales comparison approach. For this information, see Finding Value by Analyzing Comparable Sales early in this chapter. Features like land, location, topographical view, and size and shape are compared to arrive at the estimated the value. The intricacies of the variety methods of sites appraisals are beyond the scope of sales and brokers' license exams, so you need not worry about that. Finding value and analyzing a property income. The third method for estimating the value of a piece of real estate involves analyzing the income that a property generates. The income approach, as it is called, analyzes the future financial benefits of a piece of real estate and converts it into an estimate of present value. As you may imagine, appraisers use this method when estimating value on property that are purchased for their investment potential. Properties such as apartment houses, shopping centers, and office buildings usually appraise using this method. The two methods within the income approach that I review are the gross rent multiplier method and the income capitalization method. I show you some calculations, but most exam questions are about definitions and methods. Math questions in this subject area are fair game. Although you don't see many, you shouldn't be surprised to see one or two. Grossing out the rent. The gross rent multiplier, GRM, the gross income multiplier, GIM, techniques is for estimating values are based on the idea that a property value can be calculated as a multiple of the gross rent. These formulas state the sufficiently. Gross monthly rent times GRI factor equals value estimate. Gross annual income times the GIM factor equals the value estimate. The gross rent is the monthly income of a building with no deductions for expenses. Because single families and smaller residential apartment buildings of fewer than 5 units depend primarily on rental income, the GRM technique is used for these type of buildings. Larger apartment buildings and non-residential commercial properties may have income to addition to rentals. In this case, the income used is the gross annual income rather than a monthly rent, and a factor is known as the gross income multiplier, GIM. Other than that, the formulas are the same. You're now currently asked, so where do I get the GRM or the GIM factor? As with the data appraisers use to calculate is based on the market. After getting all the information needed on a subject property, the appraisers research the market for the type of property, which is usually the local market, to obtain the number of comparable sales. Comparable sales are recent sales of similar buildings. After locating a number of similar buildings, the appraiser needs to find the sales price and the gross income of each building. By dividing the sale of the building and the gross rent, the appraiser obtains a GRM or GIM for each of the comparables. If the buildings are similar, which they should be if they're comparables, the gross rent multiplier also will be similar. Remember, if you're dealing with GRM, you're using monthly rent figures. If you're working with GIM, the income figures are annual. Here, I give you an example of each. You want to note that when you leave the classroom and you're working in your first $1 million real estate, buyer and sellers may use these terms interchangeably. So you may find yourself talking about a GRM using annual rent numbers. You also need to be clear if you're in conversation with the buyer and seller in understanding what they are referring to. The distinction I make in previous sections, however, should be good enough for the exam. Say you're appraising a 3-unit residential rental property. The gross monthly rent of this property is $1,000 per apartment or $3,000 per month for the whole building. You research similar buildings and find these 3 comparable properties that are in the same location, approximately the same state, and will generate approximately the same gross monthly rent. The data shown here. Sales price $200,000, gross monthly rent $2,000. Sales price $350,000, gross monthly rent $3,500. Sales price $275,000, gross monthly rent $275. You apply the formula for finding the GRM to this data. Sales price divided by gross monthly rent, the GRM. Applying the formula to the example data, you find that the GRM for each of the comparables will be 100, which means the comparable buildings each sold for the price that was 100 times its gross monthly rent. The final step to applying the value formula to the subject property. Gross monthly rent times GRM equals estimated value. 3,000 times 100 equals 300,000. Now you say you want to estimate the value of a small commercial building whose monthly income is 7,000. You find the following 3 comparables. Sales price, 1 million sales price, 100,000 annual income, 900,000, 90,000 annual income. Sales price 950, gross annual income 9,500. Using the formula sales price divided by gross annual income, you find that each building sold for 10 times its annual income. Then applying the formula gross annual income times GIM equals the value minus 84 times 10 equals 840. Note that in the problem I give you is the monthly income figures for 7,000. You need to multiply this times 12 in order to arrive at the annual income of the 84,000. The GRM method in particular is useful for small income producing properties such as 1 to 4 unit residential properties. The GIM technique is more useful for larger residential properties as well as commercial and mixed use properties. For more about methods related to GRM, see Chapter 18. Capitalizing the income. Another method for appraising real estate based on income is known as income capitalization approach. Like the GRM and the GIM, the method converts the income of a property into an estimate of its value. Appraisers generally use this method for commercial buildings such as shopping centers, office buildings, and large apartment buildings. The base formula for the approach, commonly referred to as the IRV, is the net operating income, I, divided by the capitalization rate, R, equals value. You can break the formula down into 3 steps. Number 1, estimating the net operating income. Step 2, determining the capitalization rate. Step 3, applying the IRV formula to arrive at the value estimate. Keep in mind that I cover more math related in capitalization in Chapter 18. Estimating net operating income. The appraiser needs to have access to income and expenses statements for the subject building and for similar buildings in the area to estimate the net operating income. Having that information on hand enables the appraiser to accurately estimate income and expenses for the building. Remember that all income and expenses in the income capitalization method always are normal figures. You can break down the actual process of estimating the net operating income, the NOI, into 4 steps. Step 1. Estimated potential gross income. Potential gross income is the income that the building generates when renting at 100% occupancy, at a market rent, or a lease rent, or a combination of both. Market rent is based at the normally is charged for the kind of space in the marketplace. Lease rent is also known as schedule or contract rent. Potentially gross income includes adding an income for the principal source of income for the building, such as rents in an apartment building. Subtract the vacancy and collection loss figure for potential gross income. This number, which usually is expressed as a percentage, is the appraiser's estimate for the market for these kind of buildings. In the local area, it reflects the normal loss of income caused by non-payments and rent and periodic vacancies. Step 3. Add in other income. Buildings sometimes generate other income that is unrelated to or only moderately related to the primary sources of income of the building. For instance, the utility company may rent space on the roof for a microwave antenna, or a building may have parking spaces that it rents to the public. It is considered other income and then is added in at this point. The result is called effective gross income, the EGI. Step 4. Estimate all building expenses and subtract them from the effective gross income. Building expenses fall into 3 categories: fixed, variable, sometimes called operational, and reserved. Fixed expenses are expenses that don't change with the occupancy of the building, like the property taxes and insurance. Variable expenses are pretty much all other expenses, some of which may vary in occupancy of the building. These expenses also include snow removal, utilities, management fees, and so on. Reserves, sometimes called reserves for replacements, are funds the landlord puts aside for items that have to be periodically replaced, but not on an annual basis. Cooking stoves in an apartment are examples of reserved items. Note that the expenses don't include mortgage payments and building depreciation. Step 5. Subtract the estimated expenses from the gross income. The result is net operating income. You can put some numbers to these steps to see what the formulas look like. Potentially gross income, $200,000 minus vacancy and collection loss at 5% of the $200,000, $10,000. Add additional income, $5,000 equals effective gross income, $195,000. Expenses, fixed, $40,000. Variable, $95,000. Reserves, $10,000. Total expenses, minus $145,000. Net operating income, $50,000. Determining the capitalization rate. A capitalization rate is similar to the rate of return, that is, the percentage that the investor hopes to get out of the building in income. There are a number of ways appraisers learn to calculate capitalization rates, most of which are beyond what you're required to know. The most straightforward method, and one I teach, is pretty simple. All you need is some comparable sales, buildings similar to the subject property being appraised and have sold for recently. The formula you use is net operating income, I, divided by sales price, V, equals the capitalization rate, R. The formula is applied using the net operating income and sales price of each comparable that you're analyzing. Note in this formula the reversal of the IRV formula for finding values. See capitalization to income early in this chapter. A building sells for $600,000. Its net operating cost is $60,000. Applying the formula, you divide $60,000 by $600,000, and it looks like $60,000 divided by $600,000 equals 0.1 or 10%. Capitalization rates are expressed in percentages. Although the results may look wrong because you're always dividing a smaller number by the bigger number, remember that you're trying to get to a percentage, so the answer always is less than 1. After studying the various capitalization rates you get after applying the IRV formulas, you get selected the one you think is the most applicable to the building you're appraising, and apply it to the final steps. Applying the formula to estimated value. Now back to the basic income capitalization formula. You can use the number from the previous examples to calculate the value. Net operating income, I, divided by capitalization rate, R, equals the estimated value. So 50,000 divided by 0.1 or 10% equals 500,000. By dividing the net operating income of the subject property by the capitalization rate you have chosen, you arrive at the estimate of 500,000 in the value of the building. Calculating income. Now don't panic. I didn't slip another step in there, but you may find one other part of the formula that test writers occasionally like to ask about. Calculating net operating income. Notice that I said calculating and not estimating. Suppose you have a commercial building that sells for $700,000 and the rate of return on the capitalization rate is 8%. With that information, you find out what the net operating NIO is. Net operating income, NIO, is. In this case, you multiply the building sales price or the value by the capitalization rate in return. Value V times capitalization rate equals net operating income. So 700,000 times 0.08 equals 56,000. Reconciling the property value. The final step in the appraising process is coming up with the final estimate of value. When appraisers use many of these approaches as possible, see estimates in the value using a process called reconciliation. Reconciliation is the process of analyzing and weighing the results of the various approaches as applied to the appraisal problem. It never involves averaging the values. The process first involves looking at each approach in relation to the kind of property you're appraising. The appraiser relies most heavily on the approach listed below and the best suited for a particular kind of property. The sales comparison approach, single family home. The cost approach, unique properties such as churches. The income approach, investment properties such as office buildings. The appraiser uses the other approaches to support the results value estimated because the difference among the three individual values estimated usually is not that great. Finally, the appraiser prepares the report in whatever formula is appropriate for the project, usually either of the form reports, which is how most mortgage appraisals are done, or what are referred to as narrative report. The form was created by the federal agencies to provide a standardized way of preparing appraisal information. It is known as the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report Form, URAR, or sometimes the Fannie Mae form. For the agency that was the most responsibilities for its creation, a narrative report, which is used mostly for large commercial property appraisals, is a term papers you do in school and contains more information than the form report. And that was part 5. You want how much? Validation and financing of real estate. Chapter 14, Appraising Properties. Thank you.